These are the two Ole Miss names that we're just simply not talking about enough.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today, we're diving into two names that aren't quite getting enough attention with about a week to go until the season kicks off, and that's Trey Washington and John Saunders. These guys were standouts on the Ole Miss team for Lane Kiffin a year ago, but with all eyes now on all the new transfer portal DBs under Pete Golding, they're kind of flying under the radar. But let me tell you, John Saunders and Trey Washington, they're going to play a big role in who starts against Furman. So don't count these guys out. They have the experience and the talent to make a significant impact this season. Don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast, and hotty toddy, everyone. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your Ole Miss podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn provide different perspectives on college football, the SEC, heck, and even Ole Miss. So check it out. You know how I feel about perspectives anyway. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, fall camp is starting to wind down. We had David Eckert on, and that's the next last camp viewing of the week. And we mentioned players all over that have been standing out. We've mentioned the backup quarterbacks. We mentioned the wide receivers ad nauseum, the offensive line play. The defensive line obviously has a big role to play as well. But we do not mention the defensive backs too much. And part of that, in my opinion, is the fact that the defensive backfield is half of the defense. And there are so many players that you really just can't make heads or tails of who's playing. But one thing that we have noticed over the past 3 weeks is that people are not talking necessarily about Trey Washington and John Saunders. They're talking about Key Lawrence. They're talking about Lewis Moore. They're talking about Yam Banks. All good players, but Trey Washington and John Saunders, they're going to play a pivotal role in who plays for Ole Miss this season. It's just the way it works. Trey Washington is a leader of this defense. A year ago, he had 83 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 passes defended, and was really good at the free safety position. Is he getting a bad rep from the fan base because of the Georgia and LSU game and things like that? Is it because the transfers, they're kind of that new shiny toy type thing that everybody looks at what's new, what's next? That's what we're trying to do in college sports. Trey Washington is a really good player. He is one of the Rebels' leading returning tacklers. He's one of the leaders in turning over the football. And if you look at what he does at playing quarterback in the back of that defense, he stands out. The next player is John Saunders. Not enough people are talking about John Saunders. This is somebody that had the game-sealing interception against Texas A&M a year ago, 3 picks over the course of the season, 4 passes defended, had 65 tackles, and played the slot corner position very well for Ole Miss. It's not a weird situation. These are good football players, and they're going to go a long way to determine who plays for Ole Miss. I think the issue that the fan base has in trying to even have a conversation about DBs is there's just so many of them. If you want to look at it, like, we're not even talking about corners, but there's Trey Amos who came over, who I talked to a parent yesterday who raved about how good Trey Amos was as a cornerback. And anybody that Nick Saban recruits to come into his program through the transfer portal, that guy can play. Nick Saban's defensive backs were his babies. So we're not even talking about that group. We're talking about the safeties, and we're going to focus on the safeties because that's where Trey Washington and John Saunders play. There are several transfers that have matriculated into that room, including Yam Banks, the defensive back out of South Alabama, had 50 tackles, 6 interceptions, 11 pass defensed in 2022. A really good player. We heard the story about how he was under the weather during the season. He had the flu. The whole South Alabama team was stricken with the flu. He decided at the last moment he wanted to play a game against Georgia Southern in Statesboro, Georgia. He got on a plane, flew out to Statesboro, ended up picked up by South Alabama at the airport. They took him into the game. He played a really good game, and South Alabama won it. There's a lot of good stories as the point. It is another reason why John Saunders and Trey Washington kind of get mixed over. Key Lawrence, he's from Innsworth. He's from the Oklahoma Sooners, had 44 tackles, 2 interceptions, 3 passes defended. We're going to talk about all of these players in the later part of the show. All of these players like Lewis Moore, who came from Indiana, who last year had 83 tackles, 3 picks, and a pass defense as well. They give good reason for the fan base to talk about because people aren't brought in, or at least you think people aren't brought in without the intention that they're going to play. But I just don't think that is the case. Whenever you look at John Saunders, before he got to Ole Miss, was an outside cornerback. He was a true corner. He lined up against Kentucky the year before and actually had a decent game against Dane Key and Barry and Brown and those guys. He came to Ole Miss, and Pete Golding intentionally recruited John Saunders and those players out of the transfer portal as cornerbacks to move to safety because they wanted ball skills. They wanted ball hawks because in Pete Golding's mind, he was going to build up the defensive line and build this defense in essentially Alabama's image because he's seen exactly how to do that at a high level. But he needed ball hawks on the back end of that defense because Pete Golding realizes once you get pressure on the quarterback, college quarterbacks make mistakes. You need somebody that can take advantage of those mistakes, or eventually you're going to be in trouble. Ole Miss a year ago against LSU almost found itself in trouble when Deshaun Gaddy, a cornerback that was recruited in like this, dropped the game-sealing interception, or what would have been the game-sealing interception against LSU. Ole Miss ended up winning that game, but that's a situation that Pete Golding is trying to guard against and bringing in people with ball skills and things like that. This is going to be an interesting show because we are going to talk a lot about Trey Washington. We are going to talk a lot about John Saunders, but we're also going to talk about some of the other players that are in this safety room and in this DB room, including Brian Brown. But until then, I do want to let you know that coming up next, cornerback Brandon Turnage, dropped a John Saunders name. Does that hint at something big on the horizon for Ole Miss and Saunders, or is it just noise? Stay tuned to find out. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. There's not a bad seat in Vaught Hemingway Stadium, wherever you go. But Game Time allows you to see exactly what the view is from that seat. And you can check it out before you buy the tickets. They have the lowest price guarantee, the event cancellation protection, job loss protection as well. All the customer service bells and whistles you're looking for, they've got. They just simply take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with tickets as well. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. it's really, really interesting about what is going on. And thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. Now make the second listen Spencer McLaughlin and his Locked On College Football podcast. He can get you ready for an exciting season with discussion on the upcoming season and games and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the portal, NIL, the playoffs, and more. College football, Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little bit different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every game on Sunday afternoon, even the out-of-market ones. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel it anytime. Maybe you want to bet on Ole Miss and their over-under and 9.5 wins this season, or Jackson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman. Now is the chance. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. And I did my reader a little bit earlier on the Locked On College Football podcast. Check that out. They're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Monday, we just got player interviews. There was no practice access for anybody. But one of the players that interviewed was Brandon Turnage, and they asked him what he did at Tennessee. And he mentioned that he played a lot of slot corner his last year at Tennessee, even though at Alabama in his first year at Tennessee, he played a lot of true corner, and he's playing a lot of true corner at Ole Miss. But he mentioned the slot corner and said somebody mentioned, I don't know if it was Brandon Turnage or the reporter asking the question, it's like, do you mean John Saunders' position? He's like, yes, John Saunders' position, just matter-of-factly. And that is something that, could mean nothing, could mean everything, but the ease in which Brandon Turnage answered that question proved that John Saunders is probably still a fixture, at least, in that position. Now, listen, I talk all the time about defense not being a starting 11. It's a starting 22, and you need the depth with all the tempo and everything going on. You need 22 players that you can count on without the bottom dropping out of what's going on. So all of these players are likely going to play, even if they're not the first one on the field. John Saunders, though, is a name that nobody has talked about. Nobody. John Saunders is a guy that came back to Ole Miss for his last year after being third-team All-SEC a year ago, and everybody just assumes either Yam Banks or Key Lawrence or Lewis Moore is going to take this man's position. Now, that might happen. It might be a situation that John Saunders hardly plays football, but that would surprise me. With the way that the Saunders group play football and Trey Washington and those guys and their knowledge of the system and the leg up that they had going into spring and even into fall camp, it would really surprise me if John Saunders was not on the field whenever Ole Miss took on Furman. It's just a situation that John Saunders knows the expectation. Now, Ole Miss's defense is probably going to change a little bit from week to week. Pete Golding is famous for kind of adjusting his defense for who he's playing. And with having these different type of defensive coordinators in the room where you have Pete Golding, who is a 4-2-5 guy. He is known and has done a really good job with defensive linemen over the course of his career. But you add a Zach Arnett, who is an assistant linebackers coach, but he was originally a defensive coordinator at Mississippi State, and he was the head coach at Mississippi State a year ago. He is a 3-3 stack defensive coordinator. So you have a 4-2-5, a 3-3-5, and then on the back end, you have the co-defensive coordinator, that is B. Brown, who is a 3-4 defensive coordinator, who is known for putting his defensive backs in position to make plays. Listen, all of these coaches have different strengths. And this is one of the reasons I'm so excited. And it's probably one of the reasons that offense is kind of struggling through spring practice, other than the fact that they have a really good defensive line. You have the defensive line whisper in Pete Golding. He is really good at scheming up the defensive ends to make plays on a defense. Will Anderson, all the way back to his days at UTSA. It's just what he's known for. That's how he's made his bones in coaching. Then you have Zach Arnett, who is, like I said, a linebacker whisperer. The one thing Mississippi State had that you could count on was good linebacker play. They made Jet Johnson into not just a serviceable linebacker, one of the leading linebacker tacklers in the whole of Southeastern Conference. Turned him into a good player. Zach Arnett should get credit for that. His system is designed to free up linebackers. On the back end of the defense, B. Brown, and I've talked about this multiple times, he is known for having one of the most explosive defense when it comes to defensive backs in all of college football, turning the quarterback over. So you can see it. And I will say this again, and I've said it multiple times. When you look at this defensive line, they're designed to get pressure on the quarterback and make him make quick decisions. Linebacker-wise, they can attack and blitz to make this a full-out deal, or they cover up the hot route receivers, and the ball hawk cornerbacks and safeties are designed to make explosive plays. And overall, Lane Kiffin has designed this defense to get the ball back for that explosive offense. It's a game where I do not think that Ole Miss this year is going to be playing many 51-45 games, giving up 52 points to Georgia. I do not think that that's going to happen. I think this defense is too good. I think the chance is that LSU game this year, if last year's LSU game happened this year, Ole Miss wins that game by 3 touchdowns. The Georgia game, Georgia maybe still wins that game because it's in Athens, but it's not 52-17. It's 38-28, that type of game. So we'll see exactly how it looks, but those pieces is how the defense is supposed to work. And a lot of this is B. Brown bringing in some extra pieces so we can figure out how to make this fit. Again, John Saunders a year ago, third-team All-SEC, really good player, had basically a game-winning interception against Texas A&M. And Trey Washington was the quarterback of the defense a year ago, even over the linebacker positions. Trey Washington lined up all over the field and simply made plays and was a big part of this defense chewing up bad two-mid offenses a year ago. That is the way it worked. And that is the way potentially it could work with all of these transfers adding to this. And we're going to talk about them right now as well. So coming up next on Locked On Ole Miss, the point is Brian Brown has a wealth of talent in the defensive backfield. With so many DBs to choose from, any one of them can make a big impact this season. Stay tuned to find out who might see the most time on the field. You know, it's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers and hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every single time you shop. Earn hundreds of items on groceries to beauty supplies or even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. So you can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, even Best Buy, and more. It's time you joined over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 just to try Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google's Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Again, all one word. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Now, it's really cool with the toys that Brian Brown have. And we talked about Trey Washington and John Saunders being major cogs potentially in this Ole Miss defense. And I think they're going to have a huge say in who starts basically all season long because they're just really, really good players. But the reason they're probably getting overlooked is because of how many new players that Ole Miss has brought in. Like I said, you had Yam Banks. Yam Banks came in and started almost immediately getting on the field. This is a guy that I expect to play a lot. In 2022, he had 50 tackles, 6 picks, 11 passes defense. It was so much that whenever he entered the portal, even though he is from Ridgeland, Mississippi, everybody assumed that he was going to follow Kane Womack to Alabama. Really interesting type stuff. You have Jaden Kennedy. This is a transfer that came over from Tulane. He had a horrific knee injury at Tulane in 2022. Basically, he was very sparsely playing in 2023. We're looking to see exactly where he sits. He's a guy that played slot corner for Tulane in 2021 and was All-American Conference doing that as a freshman or a sophomore, a young guy. I think it was as a freshman. If he has recovered a little bit, that adds a little bit of a wrench into all of this as well. Again, Key Lawrence, player out of Innsworth High School in Nashville, Tennessee, from the Oklahoma Sooners, 44 tackles, 2 picks, 3 passes defended a year ago. He's a name that I've heard a good bit in fall camp. And you have Lewis Moore, who is my pick. If you've listened to this podcast for any period of time, he is my pick to be the Dejon Anthony of this year's class. The guy can just play football, but we have to see exactly how Pete Golding is going to deploy all the members of this defensive unit. It's going to be really interesting. And before we get out of here, I do want to mention kind of knickknacks that we picked up at the press conference yesterday. Lane Kiffin spoke to the press. He was asked about the backup quarterback situation, I think from David Eckert from the Clarion Ledger. And Lane Kiffin said they are all doing great. It's fantastic. Lane is not going to name a winner in the quarterback race, even if one exists. Even if every member on the team has an idea of who the backup quarterback is, Lane is not going to give that away. Lane is not going to probably name a backup quarterback, and you could have a situation to where Austin Simmons is the backup one week and Walker Howard is the backup next week. But in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, if Jackson Dart went down, God forbid, I think that Austin Simmons is going to be the quarterback that takes over for Ole Miss. I think Austin Simmons is the way forward for Ole Miss football. I'm not saying that Walker Howard is not a good quarterback. I'm saying that Austin Simmons is Tua plus 3 inches and with about 20 pounds. He's about 6'5", 220 pounds right now. The left-handed flamethrower out of South Florida coming in. His debut and unveiling to the Ole Miss fan base is probably going to be that Furman game. I'm looking at a situation potentially to where Austin coming into the game is real similar to, do you remember when Jalen Hurts had Alabama up like 31-3 on that Matt Loke 2017 team in Tuscaloosa, and they pulled him out of the game, and you're like, oh, thank goodness. Jalen Hurts was killing us, and they put in a young freshman named Tua Tagovailoa who just proceeded just to carve Ole Miss up, just destroyed them. That is how I envision this ending up for Ole Miss football. I do not know that anything. I do not have that confirmed. That's just my gut. That's just my opinion. And so, as somebody that's seen a bunch of these practices and a bunch of these quarterback competitions, you generally know who the dude is. And I think that moving forward, he might be the dude. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. And thank you very much for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives on Ole Miss, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast. Your sport means the world to us. For your second listen of the day, check out the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin will get you hyped for an exciting season with in-depth discussions and the upcoming games and the ever-evolving landscape of college athletics. From conference realignment to the portal to NIL to the new college football playoffs, Spencer covers it all. You can find Locked On College Football on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And exciting news, everyone, you can now become Locked On Ole Miss Insiders, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss. Our texting program sends you notifications on anything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description. For those of you watching on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.